here today with so many people wanting to learn more about the Sphinx that moved to Philadelphia. I do want to give a little opening to all this. This lecture is going to tell the story of Penn Museum's Sphinx, the largest in the entire Western Hemisphere. Dr. Stephen Phillips and I go way back. He used to do Expanding Horizons programming when we all participated in that. And I was so happy after several years he said he would come back. But I'm looking at Cheryl, I know you've seen him before, and some other faces in here. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Dr. Steve, and I told him he has to share a bit about himself. He's going to make this come alive for you, but I think it's important to know where his background is. So Dr. Steve is the curator, research coordinator in the Egyptian section of the Penn Museum. He specializes in the fields of biological anthropology, archaeology, and Egyptology. And he is listed with the Register of Professional Archaeologists. So as you know, he has traveled extensively. And he's done work in Jordan, Petra, Egypt at the Great Pyramids, and he was actually in, I think it's the Great Western Cemetery in Giza? Yes. So he will give you a background, and he's going to make this come alive. And if you enjoy the program, I've already talked to Sam about offering a trip to the Penn Museum in the fall. If you haven't been, it is spectacular and highly underrated. So welcome today, and please join me in welcoming Dr. Stephen Phillips.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Heather. Can everyone hear me all right? Wonderful. We're going to have a very interesting afternoon. I'm going to be telling you the story of, I have the Sphinx. Yes, that's true. We're talking about the largest Sphinx in the Western Hemisphere is right here in Philadelphia. I couldn't be more thrilled to be able to be back here with you. My very first time here was way back before the pandemic when we were still able to do the Expanding Horizons, which I was very blessed to be able to be part of. Since then, I have put together quite an extensive bit of what I refer to as lifelong learning. I am a lucky person. In my career, as you heard a little bit from Heather, I have been on archaeology excavations in Petra. Anybody ever heard of that place? I was there for my very first archaeology dig way back in 1992. And we can talk about that. It's one of my very favorite classes to present. We can do it briefly in one class, just skimming it, or we can do it truly as a lifelong learning class in 2 or 3 or 4 parts. That was my introduction to archaeology when I was still a student at the University of Pennsylvania. I decided to go back to school to finish my bachelor's degree at the tender age of 40. And you may go, well, what were you doing all the years before that? I was for 18 years the guy in a car dealership in the back of the building. When you go to get the oil changed, you give me the keys. And I would write up your work order and call you when you need the $400 muffler replacement or the $300 brake lining replacement. That's what I did before I went back to school. I was also very lucky. I applied for an adult continuing education program at the University of Pennsylvania. That's how I got my foot in the door. I was able to complete my bachelor's degree there in the Department of Anthropology. That was great, but I realized I'm going to need to do a little more than just my bachelor's degree. So I applied for graduate school at Penn, and I was accepted into the program, also within the anthropology department. So that led me to doing my master's degree. And at that particular time, I was deeply interested in what's referred to as Paleolithic archaeology. There's a mouthful of words. Paleolithic stone. We're talking about working for 4 summers in a row on another archaeology dig with one of my other professors, Dr. Harold Dibble, working in a cave site that we were able to date to 60,000 years ago. And what were we pulling out of a cave from 60,000 years ago? Bits and pieces of stone left behind by our evolutionary ancestors, the Neanderthals. Heard of the Neanderthals? What we used to nickname I can't say cavemen anymore, can I? Cave persons. A lot of people tell me I don't have to know about a Neanderthal. I was married to one for many years. This picture on the screen came a little bit later. All during my training, I first was accepted as a work study student in the office of the curator in charge of the Egyptian section of the Penn Museum, Professor David Silverman's office, where I remain to this very day. I think we're now in competition with each other to see who's going to outlast the other one. This image is taken in what Heather just mentioned is called the Great Western Cemetery, behind the Great Pyramids of Egypt. I was primarily, one of my biggest projects that I participated in was an archaeological dig here in this portion of the cemetery, a joint project co-sponsored by Brown University here and Cairo University in Egypt, coming together to re-excavate 8 acres of the cemetery to the northwest of the Great Pyramids. One of the most incredible experiences I have ever been on, because we went over there a day or two after Christmas and came home usually the first weekend in February. So you're living there in Egypt among the Egyptian people, going to grocery stores, driving around the city. Let me tell you, when you commute to work every day and you drive around that pyramid over here, you realize pretty quickly we're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. Definitely not. I am very honored to be able to share aspects of my 30-some year career with all of you in the form of lifelong learning. That's why we're here. I'm giving you things that we literally teach in classes at the university. Overwhelmingly, everything that I am presenting in these classes is the result of my own travels and my own research. So you're going to go behind the scenes today at an object in the Penn Museum, but in future classes, if you enjoy this, I love doing it. I go to Doc Woods every other month. I go to the Lutheran community at Telford the last Friday of every month for a decade. Also over to the community at Rock Hill every month, the 3rd Thursday. Everyone seems to enjoy these classes. I hope you do. With any kind of luck, I'm taking a little bit of a sidetrack here today just to introduce myself. I don't normally have to do this, but I hope that you enjoy this class. I also encourage you, as we're going along, feel free to ask a question. Feel free to ask for a clarification. If there's something in the back of your mind, shout it out. That's why we're here. The good news with my lifelong learning classes, I will never give you a quiz. You do not have to take notes. There are no final exams, and unless you ask for it, you don't have to write a term paper. You're here just to get enriched. We're never too old to learn something. I am perched on the corner of a 4,500-year-old tomb in this photograph. If you go behind my hat and down over the hill between those 2 pyramids, that's where you come to the Great Sphinx of Egypt, the one we're so familiar with. What we're going to be doing in today's class, I will first introduce you to this area of Egypt and introduce you to some of the more iconic things we think about when we initially think of ancient Egypt, how the Sphinx is still with us in many ways to this very day. Then we're going to move on to the artifact that is in the Penn Museum collection, and it has been here in Philadelphia since 1913. We recently, meaning 2019, we're in the process of reinstalling and redoing the galleries that contain our Egyptian material at the museum, including repositioning the Sphinx from where we installed it in 1929 to where we moved it in the summer of 2019. We're going to go on that journey. How in the heck did the largest freestanding Sphinx in the Western Hemisphere wind up right here in Philadelphia? That's going to be our story. If everything goes okay and I stay on schedule, you might be able to get out of here in time for dinner. So, I tease, please. The other thing I want to point out to help put things in context, because oftentimes we don't really realize it, I am perched on the corner of a 4,500-year-old tomb. I can say that, I can prove that by its architectural construction, by the artifacts that we find in this part of the cemetery. We also know that those pyramids in the background, I promise you again, aliens did not help build the pyramids, period. We have overwhelming archaeological evidence that the Egyptians did it themselves. We can talk about those in the future too, having spent as much time there as I did. I do have a couple classes where we can talk about putting pyramids into their proper context. That's many ways what I'm going to be doing with the Sphinx today, putting it into its proper context. What the heck is a Sphinx anyway? 4,500 years for the erection of those pyramids, 2,500 years before our current or common era, BC. To put that in context, Julius Caesar, Cleopatra, who we've all heard of, Mark Antony, and I don't mean Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor, the real ones, they actually lived in the 1st century before our current era, BC. When Cleopatra and Julius Caesar were born, those pyramids had already been there for 2,500 years to them. They are both closer in time to the invention of the iPhone than they were to the building of the pyramids by 500 years. This is the gigantic gulf of time that has gone by in a place like Egypt. So we're going to be moving on to that Sphinx. Where you see it today, its new location after we managed to get this thing moved, you're looking at an artifact that is one solid piece of red granite. It is over 12 feet long, by over 6 feet high, by over 4 feet wide. We estimate it weighs somewhere in the neighborhood of 25,000 pounds. You don't just pick it up, tuck it under your shoulder, and move it from one end of the building to the other. We're going to be talking about that too. We're going to be putting it and sphinxes in general into their context. So off we go. We leave the comforts here of our community on the east coast of the U.S., go over 5,000 miles away to the northeast corner of Africa, and plunk down in both ancient and modern Egypt. Iconic images, iconic things that come to your mind when we say ancient Egypt or modern Egypt. Of course, we think about the magnificent Nile River. I took this photograph from the middle of a river. I have been to Egypt 12 times, 13 times, 3 of which I went over as a tour guide for tours, which I will tell you is a whole lot of work considering you start working when you get to the airport here in Philadelphia and you don't stop until you come home. But you get to go out in the middle of the Nile River and take incredible pictures like this. Looking towards the west, towards where the sun sets. Right back in this area, back in here, is where the famous Valley of the Kings is located, where they found the tomb of Tutankhamun back in November of 1922. That can be another class we can do in the future too. I have been in his tomb several times. My boss, Professor David Silverman, was the curator for 2 of the venues of the massive King Tut exhibit that came to the United States in the 1970s and early 1980s. He finished his PhD in Egyptology, and one of his very first jobs, albeit temporary, was to be the curator of the Chicago venue of that incredible exhibit, from which we get the term blockbuster. We can talk about that too. This man was buried in 3 coffins nested together. The 3rd innermost coffin was made of solid gold. It weighs over 245 pounds. Just like everybody's already reserved a solid gold coffin, I'm sure. I don't think so, right? It's a timeless land. This view And even the shape of the sail on that boat have not changed in thousands of years. If you, in fact, were King Tut, if you were out on your boat on the Nile at this very spot 3,500 years ago, the view would be the same. This is what's mind-boggling is a place like Egypt, and among the many reasons why I love it so much. Any of you who have traveled there, for vacation, I hope what we're going to be doing in our series of classes is to bring it all back, to bring it alive, to bring you to places like the iconic pyramids. I will wholeheartedly admit I didn't take that fancy picture. That's from the National Geographic. But it does give you the iconic image that we are so used to seeing, with a local person with his camel. And to tell you the truth, it's not just for the picture. He's on his way over here to where all the buses come to drop off the tourists, 10 to 15,000 a day, because he wants you to rent the camel so you can take a ride on it around the pyramids. He's on his way to work, okay? And we've got the real Sphinx, so to speak. The one that came first, the one that is still flanking the front eastern side of these great pyramids. This one in this photograph is not a freestanding statue. They carved it out of a lump of bedrock that was already there. The pyramids themselves are on a plateau. As you can see, they're a little bit higher up than the Sphinx. They chose this location because it is an outcrop of bedrock. The pyramids are not built on sand, or these three. They're not built on sand. They're built on a solid bedrock base for stability. The other thing we want to keep in mind, and we can talk about it again if we do pyramids, these are not the only three. They're just the three that we see all the time in TV and magazine and in print. There's over 120 pyramids in Egypt that we know about, and archaeologists are still finding the remains of them. Some of them were turned into stone quarries. They disappear, all but the few lowest layers, which get covered in sand, which is why we lose pyramids every once in a while. So that Sphinx is what set off the whole idea of Sphinxes. We're going to be talking about that for the beginning of today's class. Then I'm going to move you into the discovery and the moving of the Sphinx here in Philadelphia. So that Sphinx, which we always see the picture of in front of the pyramids, is 4,500 years old. It faces due east. So it has witnessed every single sunrise for the last 4,500 years. If only it could talk. As you're going to be able to see, when Cleopatra was on the throne, when we could talk about her as a lifelong learning class too, by the way, when she was on the throne of Egypt as what we refer to as the last native ruler, even though she had a lot of Greek blood in her, she took Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, separate times, on a tour of her country, which even to her was ancient. Even to her, her land was ancient. The Sphinx has been there for 3,000 years of ancient Egypt's history. And because it had been there so long, even by Cleopatra's time, the Sphinx itself became considered almost divine, almost mystical because of its great age. When you go down between the paws of the Sphinx, and I've been able to do that a couple of times because our archaeology dig was just over the other side of the hill from where I showed you. Let me go back. Just go behind here and over the hill. That's where I was sitting on that tomb, part of our excavation. There is between the paws and up against his chest what we refer to as a stela, a slab of stone that looks all the world like a modern-day tombstone. In fact, we need to put it in a better context. The shape, size, and purpose of a modern-day tombstone comes from this. They did the same thing thousands of years before we adopted it into our world over here. That is a dedicated stela. We nickname it the Dream Stela. We know it was erected by a king in Egypt whose name was Tutmosis IV. He lived and ruled some 1,000 years after the Sphinx was built. When King Tutankhamun was on the throne for his 10-year reign, He came 1,300 years after the Sphinx was carved, and he was about 900 years before Cleopatra came along. This man, when he was still a prince, was out hunting one day in the desert area behind the pyramids. He became tired. He lay down to rest because the sun at midday was getting too hot, too strong. At the time he was there, and I'm going to relate to you the story that he carved on the front of that stela. The Sphinx was buried almost up to its chin in windblown sand. He relates that he was tired, that he dismounted and got off his horse, and he lay down in the shadow of the head of the Sphinx to take a rest of leaning up against the chest of the Sphinx. The sun was at high noon, so there was a shadow here in the front to protect him from the sun, and he fell asleep. And in that sleep, he had a dream. And that dream has been memorialized on the face of that stela. This is what you see. Here we have Tutmosis IV on that side. We have Tutmosis IV on that side. We've shown facing the Sphinx, which is this one. He's making, and the inscription that survives in here, we know it's Tutmosis because there is a cartouche, an oval shape with hieroglyphs inside. If and when you ever see a cartouche, you are guaranteed that the name of a royal person will be written inside. It tells us his name. This is very helpful in archaeology when the guy's name is on the monument. Very useful info. What is here in the text down below? Let me give that to you. Now, the statue of the very great Hepri, which is the name the Egyptians gave to the Sphinx. I rested in this place, great of fame, the site itself. Remember, even to this prince, this thing had already been there with its pyramids well over 1,000 years when he was born. So he is just in awe of it as we are to this very day. Rested in this place, great of fame, sacred of respect, the shade of Ra, that means the sun god, which they represented by the sun itself, where the shade was resting upon him. Memphis, the capital city close by, which we're going to be dealing with soon in today's class. And every city on its two sides came to him, their arms in adoration into his face, bearing great offerings for his ka. That is the equivalent of what we call the soul. One of these days it happened that Prince Tutmosis came traveling at the time of midday. He rested in the shadow of this great god. Sleep and dream took possession of him at the moment the sun was at zenith. He then found the majesty of this noble God speaking to him from his own mouth like a father speaks to his son, saying, quote, "Look at me, observe me, my son Tutmosis. I am your father, Horam Akhet Hepre Re Atum. I shall give to you the kingship upon the land of the living. But behold, my condition is one like in illness. It was covered in sand and had been not taken care of for hundreds of years." The Sphinx is asking this young prince, restore me. The sand of the desert upon which I used to be now confronts me, and it is in order to cause that you do what you do in my heart that I have waited. He is asking Tutmosis in this dream, if you restore me to my former glory, clear away the sand, restore the masonry, I will in turn make you king of Egypt. Tutmosis did restore the Sphinx. Tutmosis did become king of Egypt. I guess it worked. People still to this day come to see the Sphinx. Any of you who have traveled to Egypt, that's one of the highlights of the trip, to stand in front of that incredible monument, to eyewitness those pyramids. People still come, like Napoleon. 1798, he came to Egypt from France with a large army and a good navy. He conquered the northern part of the country without too much difficulty. And the story goes that he, like anyone else, as soon as he was in control of the country, he wanted to go see the Sphinx and the pyramids. And the legend is he rode his horse up to the face of the Sphinx, which by that point had become buried in sand yet again. And he purportedly said to his army gathered in the plain down below, "Gentlemen, 40 centuries gaze down upon you." And he goes home to Europe. He was defeated quickly by the British and went home to Europe, but the mythology and the idea of ancient Egypt began to explode because people at this point started to come to Egypt in great numbers as they never had before. So the Sphinx becomes part of Western culture. The mythology of ancient Egypt starts embedding itself in Western culture. More and more Westerners start coming to Egypt. Travel begins in the 1840s. We can talk about that in the future too. They built and completed and opened the Suez Canal in 1869. This revolutionized ancient, modern-day Egypt because people from all over the world were now passing through this ancient land. We even have our own author, Mark Twain, who visited here in the 1860s when he went on a religious pilgrimage that included the Eastern Mediterranean, the Holy Land, and a side trip to Egypt. And he writes, and let me come around, I hope you can still see me, hear me. Can everyone hear me? After years of waiting, it was before me at last. The great face was so sad, so earnest, so longing, so patient. There was a dignity not of this earth in its mien, and in its countenance a benignity such as never anything human wore. It was stone, but it seemed sentient. If ever image of stone thought, it was thinking. It was looking towards the verge of the landscape, yet looking at nothing. Nothing but distance and vacancy. It was looking over and beyond everything of the present and far into the past. It was gazing out over the ocean of time. What great words from a great author over 100 years ago talking about this magnificent Sphinx. We also see it in our own world. Let me take you to the 1930s. Campbell soup. Well, you know, I think they still make the oxtail soup, to be honest with you. And some of you guys, although you're all way too young, do you remember the Campbell Soup kids? I do. I remember them in print. And who do we have selling soup? The Sphinx. Special soup every day, right? And not only do we have Campbell's soup and the Sphinx, how about Green Giant's Niblets corn, which also has been around since the 1930s? And here is the Sphinx, and here are the pyramids, and here's the great mystery of the Sphinx. And whose face is put into the Sphinx? Of course, it's the God Jolly Green Giant. And if you want even more experience with the Sphinx, get on a plane, fly to Las Vegas, and check in at the Luxor Hotel Casino. The front entrance of which is, guess what? A reconstructed Sphinx. The interior of which has reconstructed even parts of King Tut's tomb inside that casino. And they built a hotel in the shape of a pyramid with a huge spotlight that lights up and goes straight up into the clouds every night. Of course, which you know, that beam of light that goes up goes right to the alien spaceship that's circling around the Earth and communicates with it. Everybody and anybody who's anybody can go and visit the actual Sphinx, which is in the darkness behind here. The gentleman in the hat is Dr. Zahi Hawass, a former minister of state for antiquities and tourism in Egypt, a cabinet-level position. He is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania and the Penn Museum. He came here in the 1990s with his family, and he had received a Fulbright scholarship, and he earned his master's degree and his PhD in Egyptology here at the University of Pennsylvania Museum. He was just in Philadelphia last Monday night as one stop on a national lecture tour. He's kind of like a rock star today. So I put him next door to Beyonce, who goes over to Egypt to see the pyramids and that sort of thing. He actually, the story goes, he had to throw her out because she shows up for this session where he's going to show her personally the Sphinx and the pyramids. The photographers for the government of Egypt are taking pictures, and she actually had her bodyguard say, "You can't take pictures of me." She insulted him by saying, she was more important than he is in his own country. He said, "I don't think this is going to work out. Have a nice day." And he gave her the book. So the story goes. For me personally, I can't say that I've ever had to do that, but I just wanted to show you a picture. Yeah, I've been there. I've been down between the paws. I've been in the Sphinx. It's an incredible thing. But what can we tell about it now? First off, I've used that word Sphinx over and over and over and over again already this morning. What the heck is a Sphinx anyway before we start doing anything? Obviously, we've got the head of a human mounted onto the body of a lion, a biological creature that the Egyptians, of course, knew could not exist in and of itself. It is a mythical creation, and the Egyptians are credited with coming up with this concept of what we call a Sphinx. The Egyptians are also credited with coming up with the idea of kingship, a powerful ruler, usually a male, being succeeded by a son whose son succeeded, a dynastic rule until your family line might peter out. The Egyptians are credited with starting that. Starting kingship starts a whole new way of organizing your society. The kings themselves were competing with their predecessors more than anything. They want to outdo the guy that came before them. The Sphinx was carved out of rock at the time they built the 3 primary pyramids at the site we call Giza. And in order to, I guess you could say more like propaganda, the king wanted to show not only how powerful they were by being able to build these pyramids, they represented themselves in this form of a Sphinx for several reasons. It is a hybrid creature. Body of a lion, head of a man. Female sphinxes are also known. I'll show you one. What they're trying to do is represent the intelligence of a human combined with the prowess of a lion. What is a lion in its own world? The king of beasts. What is the king in his world or her world? The king of the beast of the human world. By putting these two things together, it represents a symbolic portrayal of power. The pharaoh is king in his world, equivalent to what a lion is in its world. That's what they were trying to portray by coming up with this mythological hybrid creature that only exists in stone and in images on tomb walls and in papyri. They came in all sorts of sizes and shapes. These 2 little Sphinx things made of clay are in the Penn Museum collection. We don't have them on display. You can hold it in the palm of your hand. You could put it in your, in a pocket. It's kind of like a good luck amulet that you could carry around like a rabbit's foot. And by having it, it would give you protection. King after king after king after king loved to represent themselves as a Sphinx. Here is an entire gallery in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Another little sidetrack, by the way, you may have read or heard, the Egyptians are opening a brand spanking new museum that is built out near the pyramids with its galleries oriented towards the pyramids. When you go in this new building, which is the largest museum on the planet dedicated to a single civilization, the galleries view onto the pyramids as you're going through. It is absolutely extraordinary. I have a class on that too for down the road if you want. This is the time period midway between Sphinxes and Ramses the Great, the Old Kingdom and the New Kingdom. King after king after king after king representing themselves as a Sphinx. You can see the face here and the big floppy ears. Does it recognize you to any movie character? How about the cowardly lion in The Wizard of Oz? Many people feel this was the inspiration for where they did the makeup for that character. We have freestanding sphinxes like this one, who represent one of the most powerful women who ever did rule in ancient Egypt, a woman named Hatshepsut, who came along a couple generations before King Tut, and in her own right, she ruled over 20 years. Built huge numbers of temples and monuments, many of which you go see to this very day, and had no hesitation whatsoever as presenting herself as a sphinx. So there she is. We have the Sphinx of King Khufu, the first one, the original one, that is still part of the bedrock upon which it sits. We have nearly 1,000 years later, Hatshepsut also representing herself as a sphinx. The big sphinx, and I think I skipped past the measurements if you could see them under that picture a couple slides ago. Let me just very quick. You can see the size of this thing. Over 280 some odd feet long by over, 66 feet tall. This thing is unbelievably huge. And everything in between, like from here to here. That eventually became so iconic, the entranceway to this mighty temple called Karnak is lined with sphinxes mounted on pedestals. You can see that the heads here do not represent humans. They are mostly the heads of rams. That was another way that they portrayed their primary deity among their pantheon of gods and goddesses, who they called Amun-Re. That is what this temple is dedicated to. It's a state-level temple. It is said that this place is so huge, you can take the entire Vatican, drop it down inside, and it would disappear. That's how huge this place is. So they're taking the idea of the power and the intelligence of a sphinx, of a lion, mounting a representation of the god being worshipped at this temple, putting the two together to form a ceremonial gateway into the temple itself. As you go to your right, that's east right back in here. As you go to your right, there is a causeway, an ancient Egyptian road that goes over 1.5 miles due south along the eastern bank of the Nile River. It terminates in another temple down there called the Luxor Temple that has recently been restored. The road has recently been excavated from underneath the modern-day city of Luxor. The line of sphinxes have been redone and restored. All told, between those two temples, there's over 1,200 sphinxes lining the road. Imagine how incredible this may have been in its day, when ceremonies were carried out several times a year between Temple A, Karnak, this one, and Temple B, Luxor, and vice versa. It would have been absolutely breathtaking in its day. That is kind of, I wanted to give the context of what sphinxes meant to the people who created the idea of them. And then we come to more modern times, the discovery of the Sphinx that now lives in the Penn Museum. It came from a site called, and I say it, I'm referring to the Sphinx that's in the Penn Museum. It came from a site we refer to as Memphis, not related to the one here in Tennessee. In fact, it's a later name given to the site by the Greeks who occupied it after Alexander the Great. It was a northern capital of ancient Egypt. It was excavated at the turn of the 20th century by a man I'll introduce you to very briefly, very shortly. I want to acknowledge at this point my two colleagues at the museum who I've been working with since the 1990s. We have Dr. Joe Wegner over here on the left and his wife, Dr. Jen Wegner, husband and wife Egyptologists who began their education at the University of Pennsylvania. They were both students in the early 1990s within the program. They took classes from the man I took classes from. They're now both PhDs and very prominent Egyptologists. And one year they were out on a dig together in a tomb copying hieroglyphs from the walls. And somewhere along the line in that excavation season, they realized they were right for each other. Is this the most romantic way you could meet your spouse, is in a tomb under the sands of Egypt? They're, happily together to this very day. They got married right after my wife and I did in the mid-1990s, and their son just graduated from college this year, bless his heart. They wrote a book, if you want to do more detailed reading about the Penn Museum Sphinx, and it's titled The Sphinx That Traveled to Philadelphia, the inspiration for the title of today's class. It's not expensive. You can get it on Amazon or used book dealers or Barnes & Noble, probably for $20, $25. You can get used copies quite cheaply. If you do go to the Penn Museum, I'm sure we've probably got them in the bookstore. But they researched much of what I'm talking about. You know, they published it. We have access to the museum's archives, of course. We've got all the detailed notes and everything else related to how this monument came to Philadelphia. And some of the images that I'm using in today's class come from Jen and Joe's book. So I want to acknowledge them and also recommend this for further reading if you wish. Memphis is up here where I've got the arrow in the northern part of the country. The southern capital was where I just showed you those two great temples, Luxor down here. That's the southern administrative capital. That's the northern administrative capital. This is what the area looks like today. A photograph that I took when I was over there as a tour guide in 2011. And as I was telling everybody on the trip, the puddles here, we had just had a thunderstorm. We were there in late March, early April. But the city is today essentially gone. But I guarantee you, any place you stick a shovel in the ground under here, you're going to hit the ruins of this ancient town. It was excavated systematically in the early 20th century, primarily by this chap shown here, a very famous English archaeologist named William Flinders Petrie. As a young man on the left side, as an older man on the right side, this guy is credited with being the grandfather of modern day archaeology techniques. He invented many of the ways we analyze pottery. He figured out how to tell different layers, different ages of layers, how to go about doing a systematic archaeological excavation. Prior to his day, people went and tore through tombs. They tore through temples. They were looking for artifacts to fill the galleries of museums all around the world. But the systematic, scientific excavation of ancient Egypt and later on around the world, we can often credit to the techniques that this man established. He continued working in the Eastern Mediterranean and Egypt until he was in his early 90s and passed away in Egypt itself. He spent, when he was there on these digs, we've got great pictures of him. He just moved into an old tomb and lived there while he was excavating the cemetery in the area. I wouldn't mind doing that, right? Stays nice and cool in the summertime, and it's easy to keep warm in the wintertime, and there's no grass to mow. Petrie was famous in his day. The way that archaeologists then and today even sponsor and pay for their work. You don't just have bags of cash dropped on you from the local government where you're working. You have to apply for permission to work in a place like Egypt. If you write a scientific proposal, lay out exactly where you want to work, what you hope to find out, how that's going to contribute to our knowledge of this ancient land. You submit that to the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities. You wait until the committee meets and goes over the proposals. You wait until you get told, yes, you can come, no, you can't. If you are given permission to come, then you need to raise your own money because they don't have the money to give to you. You got to raise it on your own. Today, or at least we used to, write for grants from the National Science Foundation, the National Endowment of the Humanities, the National Endowment for the Arts. We write to all those places for funding for our archaeology work, all of which has been cut off in the last few months. So we'll see how long it's going to take to continue doing archaeology in the field. But Petrie, like all archaeologists, also had private contributions. Private contributions that would support his being able to pay his workmen, the room and board for everybody, and up until the 1970s, the common practice of archaeologists around the world, you received a portion of what you discovered. That was your, I wouldn't say pay because you didn't make money on it. It was a way that you could reward your sponsors. If a museum, and we are a good example, sponsored part of his excavations, in return for that sponsorship, he would, once he received his portion of what he found, he would then allocate it to the different sponsors who made it possible for him to be there. So let's just say Mr. Petrie finds 1,000 artifacts on a given dig. He will always be working with inspectors from the Egyptian government. At the end of the dig season, maybe they want to take the summer off, they will go through the 1,000 artifacts. The Egyptian antiquities officials will first select the things that they do not want to leave the country. We'll say 750 pieces. The other 250 pieces, Mr. Petrie would then be welcome to distribute to his sponsors wherever they may be. This is how the Penn Museum got involved in the early excavations at this site called Memphis. The Penn Museum was created in the 1890s. The first galleries were built and opened in the late 1890s and the first part of the 20th century. We, at that point, were one of the United States' early museums of archaeology and anthropology. We needed artifacts for the new museum's galleries. We didn't have the funding to do our own excavations in the early days, so what we did do was to try to supply some money to the existing operations that were already there in Egypt, including Mr. Petrie. So we were able to be one of his sponsors, one of his subscribers on an institutional level. He was then, in those years, able to hire hundreds upon hundreds of workers because salary was next to nothing to pay these men. But they were happy to get the work. They cleared away over 3,000 years worth of mud and sand. You may know or may not know, but I'll tell you, for every summer until the building of the Aswan Dam, the Nile River used to overflow and flood its riverbanks every June through July and into August. This was a result of monsoon rains further south in the central part of the African continent. All those tributaries of the river would fill with water. That water would flow northward. It would very gently rise up over the riverbanks and overspread the land of Egypt on either side, turning the entire nation into essentially a huge lake. When that water receded in August back to its riverbanks, it left behind a thick black layer of highly fertile soil. In an agricultural world, this was a literal godsend, because every year the areas where you're going to grow your crops, your wheat and everything else, are replenished with rich, new, fertile soil. That is what he had to dig through. 3,000 years of those inundations. He uncovered a massive temple dedicated to yet another of Egypt's gods called Ptah, a god created as being a creator god who helped create Egypt and all the humans living on the world. And outside that temple, as a kind of a guardian, he found things like this gigantic statue of Ramses the Great, who we've all heard of, especially in the movie The Ten Commandments. I will tell you that we have no evidence that Ramses the Great looked anything like Yul Brynner. You can see the size of this monument by the person standing right here. It snapped off probably in an earthquake at its knees, but this is essentially where Petrie found it, lying on its back. It's so huge they didn't even attempt to move it. They built an open-air museum around it, which is what you go visit today. Petrie was famous for working on this site. He found another one, Sphinx, that you can see on the picture on the left. This he published in the newspapers at the time. This is around 1910, give or take. New Sphinx found. Student of British Museum discovers it in Egypt. There it is. A massive monument that is freestanding, that they carved out of the white stone called alabaster, and actually known as calcite. That monument, too, is still there, still in Egypt, and I photographed it back in 2011. That's how it looks today. There are no inscriptions on it, so we're not 100% sure who exactly it represents, but many of its features have led most historians to affiliate this Sphinx with, guess who? The female ruler Hatshepsut. That's who we believe this may be. It's estimated that this thing weighs 80 tons, making it the largest freestanding Sphinx in the world. It still stands essentially where it was found, lying in the sand to this day, now surrounded by the little knick-knack shops where you can buy tourist items. This was a trip that I took to Egypt as a tour guide in the late March, early April of 2011. I can share that with you also. I call that class 500 Miles Up the Nile, because we went less than a month after the Arab Spring Revolution that overthrew their dictator named Hosni Mubarak. We had scheduled a trip. That happened in January and February. We had scheduled a trip a year ahead that was going to go late March, first half of April. The question is, they had a revolution. Do you go? Well, we went. We'll talk about that in the future. The early days of the Penn Museum, it's all starting to come together now. As I mentioned, we were, this was an original postcard, what the museum hoped to look like when it first got opened up. So we're talking about the very early 1900s. You can see the mode of transportation going by the front door here. This is taken from what is today the area known as Franklin Field, the stadium that's still there to this day that used to be the home of the Philadelphia Eagles. We still have the Penn Relays there for over 100 years. The museum still incorporates these original parts, but there's more of it over here to the east. That's the old convention center back there, which is now long gone. The hospital is all occupying the area around here. We still have the courtyard out front. We still have a fountain out front. And the galleries are much bigger than you can see here. Back in these early years, one of our major sponsors of the museum was a local entrepreneur named Eckley Brinton Cox. He came from a family of coal mine owners. We can talk about this also. His dad and the dad's four brothers founded what's known as the Cox Coal Mining Company, headquartered in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, in Luzerne County. Still around to this very day. His dad died when he was only an infant. He was only 1 or 2 when his father died. His mother never remarried, but she inherited a considerable fortune from her husband's estate. And Eckley B. Cox and his mom spent a lot of time on the grand tours of Europe. They went to England and they went to Europe and they went to Egypt. When they got to Egypt, he was overwhelmed with what he saw and became a huge fan and an amateur Egyptologist. He began to pour his money into the Egyptian section of that department of the then new Penn Museum. At his death in 1916, he bequeathed back then more than $500,000 to keep the Egyptian department of the museum going. To this very day, we have parts of the building named after him, and we've got accounts in the accounting department that bear the name the Cox Fund. The chap on the right was one of the early directors of the museum, a guy named George Byron Gordon. I love that photograph because I think you can wear his shirt and tie to this very day, but you're going to have to be awful careful giving that dude a hug when you got a mustache like that. Look at this. I've been working on it, but I can't, I just, getting the thing to stick straight out. And that's Mr. Cox over there on the other side, holding on to a small statue of a gardener named Merair, which Cox was involved in actually finding in what is today northern Sudan, in antiquity Nubia. Gordon worked as the director day to day running the museum. Cox became the president of the museum and one of his primary funders. And the two of them were sending money to Flinders Petrie to help him with his work. In 1912, the director, and this is a facsimile of the records we have in our archives, the director of the museum receives a letter from Egypt from Mr. Cox. And let me come out here so I can read it with you. Can you all hear me? Yeah. Thanks for your letter and check, for which I enclose receipt. It's coming from this guy to that guy. During the summer, we have raised at Memphis a colossal Sphinx of Ramses II, about 11 feet long, about 11 tons in weight. The head has been much weathered. The body and inscribed base are perfect of red granite. A face might be restored from a mold of another Sphinx of the same size. Would such a piece as this be acceptable for your museum? I read this and go, duh. I think I'm interested. I will send you a photograph when I am there next month, if you think it might suit you. Of course, I hope we shall get a good deal more this year, as we shall work the temple sites of both Memphis and Heliopolis from William Flinders Petrie. That is sent on the 20th of November of 1912. The letter then goes back to him, the response, dated December 31st. Remember, letters take a little while back in to get back and forth. Dear Professor Petrie, I have your courteous favor of the 20th of November, the letter I just read. I thank you for mentioning the colossal Sphinx of Ramses II, which you raised at Memphis during the summer. If you will kindly send me a photograph of this stone, I will let you know at once whether we will accept your offer of it. Will you kindly place a valuation on the object? ? It is probable, if we decide to take it, that we will make its purchase independent of our contribution already sent. Very truly yours, Mr. Gordon. So that is sent over to Egypt, where Flinders Petrie is living. Okie dokie. We got to wait for that to get over there. Got to wait for the response to come back. No email yet. The response goes back on the 19th of January of 1913. Dear Dr. Gordon, this is coming back from Egypt. I send you a print of a small photograph which a friend took of the granite Sphinx. I hope to publish better ones this year. It is 11 feet long. Oh, thank you. We have a portable microphone. Now I can lead a religious service. It is 11 feet long and weighs about 11 tons. We would undertake its delivery to Alexandria on the Mediterranean coast free on the rail to the care of any shipping agent of yours, such as the USA consul. Otherwise, it would be left to the management of any shipping agency to collect it from the rail. I really cannot value it, as I have nothing of the sort of I know nothing of the cost of large monuments. If we are lucky this year or next, we hope to send you some other good thing for your subscription besides this. Will that suit you? Once again, I say, you betcha. Photograph that he supplied is this one. Shows the Sphinx still in situ. And as you can see, the water table has already filled up the pit. This is not what I was describing, that mud that they were digging away. And we find this monument already, they hit the groundwater. You can see that the face is naturally eroded away. There's no evidence that it was deliberately chiseled away. It appears that for many, many millennia, this would have been above the level of the mud, and the wind-blown sand blowing against its face eroded away the features. Also note, you can just barely make out, there's actually hieroglyphs right in between the paws on the chest. There's another view from the side. There is hieroglyphs on the shoulder here. Wait until it gets out of the water. Look at the base. That is what Mr. Petrie said the inscriptions are of an exceptional quality. Because this thing was buried in mud, the inscriptions that go around the base, which are dedicated to Ramses the Great, go all the way around all four sides, and they are an exquisite set of preservation. There's that thing I referred to as a cartouche, the oval. Whenever you see the oval, focus on the inside. The hieroglyphs on the interior will tell you a ruler's name. Always. It's also here in his chest, vertically. One here, one there. We can do classes on hieroglyphs too. So you can send secret notes to your friends with nobody else being able to read them. I will just tell you briefly. They wrote from right to left. They wrote from left to right. They wrote in columns up and down that you could read from the right to the left or from the left to the right. How in the heck do you know where to start? Look at the direction in which the characters are facing, and that points you to where you're supposed to start. This is not a perfect example, but can you make out a bird right there? Which way is the bird facing? Towards me. that means you start here and read the other way. Okay? Start on this end here and read that way. That's how you go with it. So there is our Sphinx as photographed while it was still in Egypt. This is the only known photograph of the Penn Museum Sphinx being mounted onto a rail car in Egypt itself. The only one we have. And it is from our archives. So you're getting behind the scenes info here on this. This man just climbed up there to give you a sense of scale of how big it is. The plan originally was to take it up the Nile River, get it to Alexandria on the coast, get it onto a freighter, get it to Philadelphia. The museum contracted with a company called Congdon, who was affiliated with the U.S. consulship. I won't read this whole letter, but I will just say that we have been informed by Dr. Engelbach, who is an assistant to Petrie, that we have this article that wants to go to Philadelphia. We will be pleased to do this, but as it is no small transaction and involves much expense for a large and heavy piece of granite weighing at least 11 tons, we must ask you to communicate with us directly and send the money ahead of time. They wanted a whole 150 British pounds. Not too bad. So as soon as it's ready, we'll get it ready for shipment. Here's what the problem was. There's Memphis where it was found. Here's Alexandria up here on the coast. You've got the river delta of the Nile River in here with all the big branches of the river. This is 1913. Railroads in Egypt were pretty primitive at that time. Remember, the railroad's idea was only invented in the 1840s. So you need to get it from here up that branch of the river and over here to Alexandria, which they wanted to do by rail. They quickly discovered that the rail line from Cairo at that time to Alexandria could not support the weight of an 11-ton Sphinx. There was no way to get it to Alexandria. So they took a side trip over to the opening of the Suez Canal. This is called Port Suez over here. They got it onto a boat going through the Suez Canal, got it up here to the exit point at the shipping city called Port Said, where, once it arrived, they couldn't find anybody willing to put it on a freighter and take it to Philadelphia. So the Sphinx literally sat on a dock for a few weeks until they contracted a merchant seaman boat called the Schildtern, whose captain said, "I'll take anything, anywhere, so long as I get paid for it." That ship actually wound up going all the way into World War I and then actually was used a bit in World War II. But this was the boat that agreed to take this. Some of these ship captains were superstitious. If I put a Sphinx on my boat, is it going to make it sink? Because of ancient Egypt. Anyway, the captain of the Schildtern agreed to get it over here to Philadelphia. It comes to Philadelphia. They pull into an unloading dock in the area that is today the Navy Yard. They pull into the dock. They immediately realize that they had made yet another mistake. There were no cranes in the first dock heavy enough to lift an 11-ton Sphinx off the boat. So the boat had to back out into the Nile River or the Delaware River yet again, head further north to the area now known as Port Richmond or Fishtown, where these docks existed, and they had heavy-duty cranes because from here is where they used to ship out. Do you remember hearing about the Baldwin Locomotive Company here in Philadelphia? We made the big, giant steam locomotives here for many, many years and shipped them all over the country. They shipped out of these docks, which had no trouble at all getting the Sphinx off and onto the ground. At that point, they had to make yet another rail car to move it with, which they did. But this was such news in Philadelphia back in those times. It was in every single newspaper. The Enquirer, the Philadelphia Record, remember the Evening Bulletin? You used to get the Enquirer in the morning, and then they would bring you the Bulletin in the evening. The Bulletin, I think, was the first one to go out of business. The Enquirer, obviously, is still with us to this day. The North American, I'm not sure what paper that is long gone. The Philadelphia Record was around for a long... Anyway, 50 men will move the big Sphinx. 12-ton specimen from ancient Memphis will be taken from the steamer today. 100 men will be necessary to remove the 12-ton Sphinx bearing the face of Ramses II from the shield turn at Christian Street. Unloading big Sphinx. Big comes in. We'll unload Sphinx today, big Sphinx for the University of Pennsylvania today. On every single major newspaper. Then they managed to get it onto a railroad car. They managed to get it from the Delaware River to the Schuylkill River, to the area today at about 23rd and Arch Street where there used to be a big rail yard. Sphinx remains on railroad car. Once they got it to what was then West Philadelphia, which was nowhere near like it is today, they were having trouble figuring out how to get it off the railroad car. So that's what these headlines are about. Sphinx remains on railroad car. Tackle must be built to get unwieldy art treasure to the University Museum. Sphinx is still homeless. Come all the way to Egypt. They said it took them almost as long to get it from the Delaware River to the Penn Museum as it did to get from Alexandria to Philadelphia. In the upper right, it's a wonderful little quote. Students offer aid in removing Sphinx. This one I love. 50 University of Pennsylvania students have volunteered to assist in the removal of the Great Sphinx from the rail freight car, which at that point they had it out at 23rd and Arch Street. Museum authorities are plainly puzzled over the problem of getting the huge piece of granite over the museum's front wall. What do they mean by that? Another piece of info from one of the papers. This ceremonial, almost Asian-looking gateway was built by the original architects. We still have it there to this day. There's our Sphinx, wrapped in burlap, with a little bit of a hat on it, parked on what is now South Street, trying to figure out how to get it over the wall without tearing down all this beautiful architecture. And he sat out there for a while. They did finally get a rigging company and get a hoist or crane to get this thing hoisted up over and into the courtyard. And can you see the Sphinx? Right here. I guarantee it never planned on being covered in snow in its home country. It sat outside the entrance of the Penn Museum for the better part of a decade. Summer, winter, spring, fall. Now, we think, oh, it's made of granite. Well, granite can be damaged by the environment too, especially extreme changes in heat and humidity and cold winter temperatures like we have here. The directors of the building and the curators were all worried that they were doing damage to this monument by leaving it outside. They finally figured out that the floor of the building here could probably support it. They got it through that doorway right there. And in the early 20th century, between 1914 and 1926, can you find it? You see it? You guys are good. Right there, right here, facing towards the doorway with the galleries all around it now. Today, this gallery in here we use for our Native American gallery, and then next to that are our numerous galleries for Central America and Africa. So that's where it sat until late in the 1920s, when we got an endowment from Mr. Eckley B. Cox, and we were going to build an entire new wing on the museum because it was growing, which even today is named the Cox Wing. That was going to be dedicated specifically to the ancient Egyptian collection, which was growing by leaps and bounds. 2 floors still there today, which we're renovating. This was the then gala opening of the ground floor of that new gallery. They had moved the Sphinx over to here, put it on its own stand. The columns that you see going here and down here and in the back are also from that site of Memphis. Petrie sent this stuff over. They are parts of a pharaoh's palace, a king's palace. The only pieces of a king's palace on display in any museum in the world to this very day. And you can still, well, you can't see them now because we're renovating it. That doorway back there is actually the doorway from the palace. So what they're trying to do, or what we were doing, the intent was to put the Sphinx more in its own context, flanking a temple, which is where it was in Memphis. I like this old picture because this would have been the cream of the crop of Philadelphia society in that day. They're having the gala opening in 1926. They just built this new wing. They had to move the Sphinx into here from where it was, and they built this wall around it and put the ceiling over top of it. And there it stayed all the way until 2019. There's Dr. Gordon, the director, standing right here. And then all the people in their nice and their finery. How much did all this cost? These are back then dollars, translated into today's money. To get it from Egypt to Philadelphia cost $400. To get it from Port Richmond to the museum cost another $400. All told, about $795. Oh, okay, so I do have it. Equivalent today of about 17 grand. Not bad. So, there it stayed. It was so iconic that, well, even now, lots of people from 1929 all the way through modern times would have their weddings in front of the Sphinx. People would have their ceremony in front of the Sphinx. If you had your ceremony at the church, people came here and we would set this up. The catering company could set it up for your reception. It's a pretty amazing place for a wedding reception when you're surrounded by artifacts thousands of years old. So by moving day 2019, that is how the Sphinx looked up until 2019. You can see the original things here. That is how it transitioned to today. That photo I took many years ago. All parts of the Pharaoh's palace all around it. We're going to move all that stuff up to our second floor gallery, which has a ceiling almost as high as this one. This column back here is supposed to be on top of this one. And there's a column back in here this is supposed to be on top of this one. We're going to put all that stuff back together and recreate a Pharaoh's palace on our second floor gallery. We need another year or two to finish it. But there is Egyptian material on display to see in the meantime. That is the Sphinx as it was. As we were redesigning and working with the designers to redo this gallery, which we want to make into religion, covering religion and mummification and all of that, our problem was, what the heck do we do with the Sphinx? You got an this 12-foot long thing that weighs 25,000 pounds. We were trying to figure out how to design the gallery around it until we worked with our engineers and they said, it was up by the front door back in 1920s. Maybe we could put it back there and redo the entranceway. And we're like, that sounds interesting. No one had even taken off the covering around the base since they installed it in 1929. And we're like, well, okay, we think we can do it. Let's see if we can do it. And June 12th, 2019, we wound up the next day on the front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer. Sphinx-like move. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people pushing this Sphinx on a ramp that was covered in vinyl sheeting to get it from one end of the building on the first floor to the northeast-west corner of the building on the second floor. So, this is the behind-the-scenes story of that. We all were, of course, had to come. All the news media came, just like it did the first time around. But now it's all the different TV stations. Fox and CBS and 6 ABC and all of that stuff. I was down here because I'm a member of the department. We want to keep an eye on our Sphinx. This is one of our colleagues from the museum. She's in a different department. So everybody's excited because it's going to come from the ground floor over here, got to get up onto this ramp, and then moved around to the other side of the building. So finally, they got it rigged up in the gallery. It's starting to emerge into the sunlight here. The first time that Sphinx felt the sun since the 1920s. I bet it felt good. There it is, moving up the ramp. This I didn't even know existed. You talk about technology today and then. Sometimes the technology doesn't have to be that heavy duty. This machine here is a giant air compressor. Underneath all 4 corners of the Sphinx, there is a box that's kind of the size and shape of a pizza box, maybe a little bigger. This thing pumps air through the hoses into the 4 boxes. The boxes have jets at the bottom. It lifts the Sphinx up off the vinyl wrap. You only need to lift it up a half or an inch. Then these guys can push it. So they're pushing it up the ramp while this thing is going. I tried to take a little movie of it with my phone, not knowing what I do, and there it is. Note that they're rocking it back and forth. They had come to a place where the two pieces of vinyl overlaid each other on the ramp. So the air was having trouble passing, and they were rock and roll the Sphinx. I don't think I would stand back here. They did have a strap all the way around it, because there was a man seated right here holding on to a lever like he was pulling a boat up out of the water. Well, we need to take it to this wing over here. We finally got it up to here, then you bump into the building, so it had to make a 90-degree left turn. There it is up against the building. At this point, we left the ground floor. We ran up onto the roof of this overhang, which we're not supposed to be in, by the way, but we know where the door is, and looked down on the ramp heading towards the other side of the building. There goes the Sphinx up the ramp. This took all day to get this here. There's the Sphinx out in the sun. It has to go up here and then back in that corner and through a window. So we get it all the way up to here. The windows kind of look like this, but they're down on the ground level underneath a blue spruce. We get it all the way up there. I run inside. The engineers had removed the entire window from the building itself. It used to be like this, now it's here. We're waiting for the Sphinx, which is down the ramp a little bit. So after lunch, they moved the air hoses over here, and they set up a ramp in what will be our new entrance gallery. That they dug out down to the walls and the ceiling, total renovation. Going to make a new permanent emplacement for the Sphinx here, made of steel I-beams. When we removed the casing around it from the 1929 installation, we discovered to our horror that they had mounted it onto a pile of railroad ties, which by 2019 were decomposing. Had we not moved it, the chance was strong that the dang thing would have fallen over in the next little bit of time. Here we go back. Some of these folks are the engineers for the rigging company. Most of them are from our conservation department, keeping a hawk's eye view on this monument so it's not hurt. Over on the right-hand side, we're getting ready for it to emerge through the window. And there it comes. Of course, nobody was allowed back in here, but we were, being members of the department, I could do it. Here comes the Sphinx inside the building. There it is, moving a little bit. They had to be careful because it started moving pretty easily here. And they, at one point, said, whoa, slow down. We don't want it to go off the end of the ramp and end up over at the hospital. Hold it, hold it, hold it. I mean, how do you move a 25,000-pound piece of stone? I will say one thing. It gives you an unbelievable appreciation of the people 3,000 years ago who carved it and moved it then. So here it comes. And we also know, by the way, that Ramses the Great stole his Sphinx from somebody else. We could tell once we cleaned it that the head had been recarved and the shoulders were recarved. He probably took it from a king before him, recarved the face to look a little bit more like him, put his name on the base, boom, it's his. There it is by the end of day number 1. They only got it to the end of the ramp. We all went home. Next thing is to get it onto its stand. So we come the next day. They got the rigging straps underneath it. You can see that they built a temporary ramp with I-beams. They start to remove all of that stuff. And there is the Sphinx hanging in thin air. A little bit heart-rending, I will say. But they can then turn these things around. We got to get the business end of this back here and the head end on this end. So when you come in the front door, you see its face. So we need to get it over to here. By the end of day number 2, they had gotten it turned around. They'd gotten it moved back. They'd gotten it positioned right over top its new stand, and plunk, there it goes. At this point, it was late in the afternoon of day 2, and we got an email from the director. If anybody wants to sign the stand down here, we've got magic markers. Feel free to stop by. So we all got to write our names on here, which I think is pretty fun, and now it's permanently encased. So there it is inside this doorway right here. That's our ceremonial entrance to the second floor. This is the main entrance that we use to this very day. Our fish pond that you saw earlier in the black and white photograph. And when you go in that doorway, this is what you see. It has been completely renovated. There are stairs going up here, stairs going up there. We have gallery or display pieces behind glass in the back here. There's a room in behind here that is very suitable for public events. We have lots of corporations that come and have their Christmas parties here, etc. We still have people come to get married in front of the Sphinx. Every school group that comes, and you guys, when you make your bus trip, stand on the steps in front of the Sphinx, and on this side is the admission desk, and on that side is an admission desk. One of our security people will be happy to take a group photo of you with the Sphinx in the background. That is, and our conservators completely cleaned it, so it's now back to its ruby red granite color from that black soot that you saw. When we saw that thing come out into the sunlight, we were horrified. It had been in that gallery for the better part of 100 years. We've got an old heating system, right? The Sphinx was pretty much black with soot and crud, but the conservators cleaned it and restored it to its original red granite glory. There it is. How much did my move cost, you might ask? $7 million? $500,000. You're right there. $850,000. This is why it costs such an enormous amount of money to redo museum galleries. We're not even talking about everything else we have to do. We're into tens upon tens upon tens of millions of dollars to do this work we're doing. Eventually it'll get done. We hope to open the ground floor gallery first and then complete the upper gallery maybe a year or two down the road. But that is how much it cost. It takes us back to the slide I always like to put at the end of a lecture of a sunset behind the Great Pyramids. That photograph I actually took a little bit after Christmas, so we're at the winter solstice. You see the sun setting between the pyramids. You see the head of the Sphinx and a pyramid on the right and the left. Let me send you home with one other tidbit I'll guarantee you never saw before. This, and this sit on the horizon outside of Cairo on a plateau. This, and this form an ancient Egyptian hieroglyph. That hieroglyph is the word Akhet. Let me show it to you. Akhet is the Egyptian word for horizon. And what is on the horizon? The pyramids of Egypt. The Egyptians themselves named this site Akhet, or Khufu's horizon. So what I'm saying to you is this, and this are deliberately forming the word for horizon. And there it is. Today was a bit of a marathon because I wanted to spend some time reintroducing myself. I hope you found this interesting and a way to just go away for an hour, to go someplace different, to learn something. You're going to walk out of those doors with a whole lot more information than you had when you came in here. That's why we do lifelong learning. Heather, thank you for the invitation to come back. To all of you, thank you for being here. We can do as much of this as you guys want between France, Jordan, and Egypt. It'll take me a heck of a long time to run out of things to talk about. From my own experience, I have been blessed with what I've been able to do in my 30-some-odd years in this field. And I am honored to be able to share it with all of you. Does anyone have any questions? I can stay as long as you want for questions and discussions. I know your tushes are sore from sitting in those chairs all this time, but if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to, whatever you need. It was that clear. Good. And again, no test. So we'll see you down the road. Thank you. Thanks, Heather.
If you do have any questions, you can certainly see Dr. Phillips afterwards. I hope it brought it to life and you learned a little something new today. I'm also going to get a listing of the presentations that we can have here. I'll post it down by my office. And if you like it, you put a check mark next to it. The one with the most check marks will be the
Sure.
one we do next.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Thank you again, and thank
Yeah.
you to all of you for spending the afternoon with us.
Thank you again. Just so you know, I've got topics on food in ancient Egypt, mummification, artwork, the pyramids themselves, aspects of the excavations that I've been on we can talk about. We can go to Jordan and go to Petra. We can go to France, where I have been in the oldest painted caves in Europe. 17,000 years back, I've been in them. We can share the origins of art too. So have a great weekend coming up, and I'll see you the next time. Thanks, guys.